Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I will be talking about virtual field trips as a tool for reducing anxieties and refocusing cognitive loads during in-person field activities. I'd like to start with a few acknowledgements. First, the Stanford Transforming Learning Accelerator, which has been instrumental in all of my work on virtual field trips. The Stanford School of Earth, Energy, and Environmental Sciences for their support, and the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation for generous financial support. Additionally, links and complete references for this talk can be found on a Google document linked by this QR code here. This is a brief outline of where we'll go today. First off, we're going to talk a little bit about what a virtual field trip is, then talk about what we can do with virtual field trips, talk a little bit about novelty space, cognitive load, and anxiety as sort of the foundation for this talk, give you a little bit of background on the study setting, show you the virtual field trip that we produce as part of this work, take a little bit of a sidestep to talk about how you make virtual field trips and why that's important for this particular study, and then we'll talk about the study method and look at the data. So what is a virtual field trip? For the purposes of this talk, I'm defining virtual field trip as bringing the field to the learner. There are many ways to do that. There are a variety of different platforms, deployment methods, and activities that can achieve that goal. This definition of virtual field trips is intentionally broad because my reason for defining virtual field trip at all is not to limit or exclude approaches. Rather, it's my hope that defining it in this way for this talk can broaden the way we think about these tools and to see them not just as a means for conveying academic knowledge, but as possible ways to improve learner experiences across the board, from anxiety and preparation to equity and inclusivity. As I'm sure you'll hear throughout this session, there are many applications being developed that are not just about conveying academic knowledge. With that definition in mind, what are some of the goals we might hope to achieve using VFTs? These are just a couple broad examples and in no way represent a complete set. One use might be to provide an online or classroom activity that recreates the outcomes of in-person field trips. This is a lot of what was catalyzed by the pandemic as instructors struggled to provide alternatives to in-person field experiences, but is now being integrated into in-person teaching in a variety of ways. The other broad goal of VFTs can be to provide participants and potential participants with better information prior to an experience so that they are better prepared to learn. This is the goal that we focused on for this particular project. Specifically, we focused on using VFTs to reduce pre-trip anxiety by providing a virtual version of the in-person field experiences students were about to participate in. Starting with a little background on this, intuitively, most instructors will recognize that anxious or stressed students may not be paying attention or learning as well as they could. There's considerable theoretical and experimental work examining anxiety and its effects on learning, but a full treatment of such is well beyond the scope of this talk. I do want to point out some of the research that forms the foundation of this project, in particular the concepts of novelty space, cognitive load, and the role of anxiety in working memory. The details of these concepts are not critical to this presentation, but I want to mention them for anybody wanting further reading on the topic. Additionally, I want to point out that this work on anxiety is part of a much larger movement in earth sciences to provide more accessible and inclusive field experiences and should not be thought of as a complete solution on itself. Another key point that is driving this work is that stress and anxiety associated with unfamiliar environments and practices may disproportionately affect students without prior access to outdoor activities, leading to an obvious equity issue in teaching field courses. While this work is obviously not going to solve all of the equity issues associated with field education, the goal of this project was to reduce or ideally equalize the pre-trip anxiety for participants by allowing them to peruse the locations virtually before going into the field, theoretically producing improved learning outcomes, but that's a next step to test. We chose to deploy this study at the Wasatch-Uinta Field Camp. If you're unfamiliar with the camp, it's a 6-week camp set in and around the Wasatch and Uinta Mountains of Utah. It draws instructors and students from a consortium of different universities, so the students have variable backgrounds and experience levels. The first day of field camp is a regional overview trip that shows students the locations and environments they will be working in over the next few weeks. We created a virtual version of this regional overview showing locations, scheduling information, bathroom availability, and basic topic information. We intentionally focused on logistics and environmental factors, only rarely including academic content as an example of tasks they would perform, hoping to specifically address anxiety associated with environmental cognitive loads and novelty space rather than academic knowledge, though we did measure both, which we'll see in a minute. This is the tour we built. I will quickly show you some of the basic functionality of the interface. The complete tour is linked in the supporting document I mentioned at the beginning of the talk if you want to follow along. You can click and drag the scene to view a full 360 degrees. There is a map inset in the corner that can be resized. Multiple maps can be added. For this one, we have a National Forest Service topo map, Google Earth satellite imagery, and the regional geologic map. The location of the photospheres is indicated on the map with a red dot, and you can see that the view direction is shown as a red cone. Additionally, interpretive overlays can be added and toggled. This is the only example of the overlays in this particular tour, as we were not intending to use the tour to convey academic content. The main information in the tour is a toggleable text box that gives basic information about the stop: name, stop number, general topic, activities to expect, logistics, and health and safety information. You can see that the box automatically changes when we move to a new location. We can also embed pop-up images for more detailed information and images. We can also make use of spherical images taken from a drone to give an overview that would be impossible in person. Before we talk about the study and the results, I want to make a slight detour and talk about how we make the virtual field trips. This won't be a tutorial on it, but it's critical in this discussion is the method of creating VFTs, and in particular the ease of creating them is what makes this use possible. To start with, there are many ways to build many different kinds of virtual field trips, and which one you choose has a lot to do with how you want to use them, what you want the user experience to be. But mostly they all require three things: photography, constructing the tour, and distributing the tour. Here are a bunch of examples of the possible ways you can do that. I'm going to now walk through how we chose to do it for this particular project. Rather than using 360 cameras or digital SLR cameras, we're using the Google Street View app, shown here, which is available on any mobile device. The app is free and does not require any extra equipment. Additionally, the images are higher quality and resolution than a 360 camera. As you can see, it requires almost no skill, as you simply find the orange dots and the app does the rest. The final output is a JPEG file that can be used in various programs. With practice, it takes only a couple of minutes for each photosphere. The only real challenge is not falling over while looking up and spinning in a circle, something I've failed at more than I care to admit. For this project, I chose to use Pano2VR. Pano2VR is a single-purchase desktop software package. It's a bit more complicated than some of the online applications that are available, but also allows for much more customization, particularly in the case of maps and overlays. This allows for the creation of skins that provide functionality. Once created, those skins can be applied quickly to new tours. Annotations can be made in Photoshop or any other photo editing programs and integrated through Pano2VR. The whole process can be done with little or no coding skills, and if you're using an existing skin, the whole process can be as little as 1 to 2 hours for a moderate-sized tour. When the tour is completed, the output from Pano2VR are HTML5 format, so it can be posted to any standard web hosting service and accessed via any web browser, including mobile devices. The tours can be distributed as links, posted to Canvas or Blackboard, accessed via QR codes, or embedded in a website. No special software is required, and the bandwidth requirements are very low. Stepping back to the study itself, for this study, students participating in the Wasatch-Uinta Field Camp were first provided with the standard orientation program on the first night. They were then provided with a virtual version of the first day of field camp. 3 weeks later, they were surveyed about their attitudes and perceptions about feelings of anxiety and preparation before and after viewing the virtual field trip. For those following closely, this was not our ideal timeline for the study, but pandemic-related constraints forced that. With that, let's jump into the data. Here's the most basic result from the survey. This is just a bar graph of the answers to the question, to what degree did the first virtual field trip affect your anxiety during the day one regional overview trip? All of this data, of course, comes with the caveats associated with self-reported perceptions. Here in this graph, 1 is reduced anxiety and 5 is increased anxiety, with 3 being unchanged. You can see that 75% of respondents answered 1 or 2, indicating some degree of anxiety reduction. While this alone would likely be sufficient for me to incorporate this process into all my field courses, let's take a closer look. These are the gain scores for pre and post treatment. We're looking at the change between answers to these 2 questions. Prior to the introduction of the first virtual field trip, how anxious did you feel? And after perusing the virtual field trip, how anxious did you feel? In these 3 categories: physical, social, and academic. For those not familiar with gain scores, this is a measure of the change in reported value from the pre-treatment to the post-treatment, in this case the treatment being the virtual field trip. The 0 column is no change at all. You can see that for physical anxiety, the category we were designing to affect, about 64% of respondents moved down, that is less anxious, by 1 or more. This gives us a much better sense of how much the VFT reduced anxiety. Included here are also data for social and academic anxiety. Interestingly, although we provided almost no academic information and only had the students use the virtual tour by themselves, they also reported reduced anxiety there as well. However, for now, we're going to label those needs further study. One of the other goals we had was to level the playing field, to reduce those with the highest anxiety more than those with the least. This is the same plot as the previous slide, color-coded by pre-score, the darker reds representing those with higher starting anxiety. Superficially, you can see that in general, those that started with higher anxiety moved the most. However, that's most likely an artifact of our survey design. So while we may have succeeded on the second goal, we can't actually demonstrate that in the data. We also collected open-ended responses from the students. While we haven't done systematic analysis of the responses, I wanted to include some representative quotes here. These are all topics that came up often in the responses. First off, allowing students to focus on teaching. Knowing when they can use bathrooms, this is always a big one. Feeling more prepared and managing anxiety. I'm ending with that quote because I want to stress the very good point the student makes. The virtual field trip didn't actually reduce anyone's anxiety. It gave students better information that helped them manage and mitigate their own anxiety. This is a critical point as it demonstrates we are not magically fixing things, we are providing better information, and the students themselves are doing most of the work to improve their learning. I want to close with some final thoughts. First, the preliminary data here, combined with the ease of production, is sufficiently convincing to me to include this type of virtual field introduction in all of my field trips. Second, providing this better pre-trip information is just one tool for creating equitable, inclusive, and safe field experiences. There are still lots of other things that need to be done in conjunction with this. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, broadening access and improving in-person field experiences must also be done in conjunction with reevaluating the traditional expectations for fieldwork. The idea that someone must be capable of scaling a mountain to be a geologist is anachronistic at best. The study and practice of geology doesn't require that physical ability. So while I hope we can continue to make the field more accessible, we also need to cultivate an attitude toward fieldwork that is more suitable to both the present and the future. And with that, I'll take questions. Oh, wait, this is just a recording. Never mind. Thank you.